and welcome to Scorebucks County's webinar on best practices to lower your business expenses. I know we all want to save money, and we have an expert in that field to talk to us today about it. But before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, the session is being recorded. You will all receive a copy of the recording as well as the slides after the presentation. Please put your questions as you gather them throughout the presentation in the Q&A, and we will address all questions at the end. Please refrain from using the chat box to advertise your business. I hear a little feedback. I hope that's not coming from me. Okay, so just a couple of comments about who's presenting this today. First of all, my name's Linda Zangrilli, and I'm the chapter chair for Scorebucks County. SCORE is the organization that is putting this webinar on today, specifically Scorebucks County. So I just want to talk a little bit about who we are, what we do, for those of you who may not know. SCORE is a national nonprofit organization that is dedicated to helping you, the small business owner. We do that through free mentoring services as well as webinars such as the one you're about to hear. And here in Bucks County, we do these webinars every Tuesday at the same time. And we've had great success. Thanks to COVID, everything is free. So that's a wonderful, wonderful benefit. If there are any benefits from COVID, that's one of them. We are a resource partner of the Small Business Administration. So as a result, we have a lot of resources at our disposal, both through our chapter, through the national organization, and through the SBA. So it's in Bucks County, we have about 70 members currently, and they come from all walks of life. They are corporate America, they are small business owners. They have been, if there's a topic out there that you need help with, they know it. A variety of disciplines are covered, but the benefit of SCORE is that if we don't have that in our chapter, we can go out to a national group of 10,000 volunteers. We can tap into any resource in the country. So it's a wonderful opportunity. If you are just starting out in business, or if you're in business and need a little help, and maybe you want to scale up your business, please reach out to us. And all of this is in the chat. It is score.org/Bucks County. Okay, commercial ended for today. I would like now to turn the program over to the seminar chair for Scorebucks County, Mr. Ed Torello. Ed?
Right. Thank you very much, Linda, and thank you all for joining us. I think you're going to find this very, very interesting and definitely apropos to anyone's business. With us, we have Michael Roberts, who's principal consultant and expense reduction analyst here in for North America. After 20 years at different executive positions throughout the Northeast, he kind of took his track record and decided to move into this area on a full-time basis. He is a detailed strategic thinker who leverages his finance and executive leadership background to deliver thoughtful advisory services to his clients. And some of his clients, for example, he's worked for the Greater Philadelphia Hotel Association, Visit Philly Destination Marketing Organization, and groups like that. Currently, Michael holds a board and lead finance committee position for the Integrate for the Good nonprofit organization here in the Philadelphia area. I'm going to turn it over to Michael now so they can start the presentation. Thank you.
Ed, thank you for that wonderful introduction, and I'm delighted to be here today to speak to the members of Scorebucks County. Obviously, this is a topic that is relevant for so many. Creating a culture of expense reduction and oversight of expenses, and focusing on making sure that we're driving the most profit to the bottom line as possible, But the key in all of this is always making sure it's at as good or better levels of service, right? So we have to keep that in mind when we're thinking of expense reduction. It's not always just about price, but it's about quality and it's about service, right? So we'll see that as a theme as we go throughout here today. We should have about 60 minutes or so of content, which should leave us ample time for questions at the end. And with that said, we'll go ahead and dive into our agenda here today. All right, so as an overview, we're going to really touch on 4 different areas. The first area will be the impact of a dollar saved and why it's important. Short-term cash flow solutions, and we'll look at our 3-pronged approach to impacting cash flow. We'll look at reducing costs in the long term and the 10-step method that we have to reduce expenses and keep them down. And finally, we'll analyze spend, and we'll go into a few key areas like what suppliers don't want you to know, RFP or request for proposal, best practices, and cost and expense management continuum. So with that said, we'll go ahead and dive right in here today. All right, so how much is a dollar saved worth to you? So I always think this is a very interesting model, and it's always how I like to start off to really show the impact of expense reduction and creating an expense reduction culture. So with this model, we'll just use a hypothetical business. Let's say we have revenues of $100,000. Let's say we have direct costs of about $35,000. So when we're thinking of direct costs, we're thinking really any cost that's associated or directly associated with either manufacturing our core business or directly providing the service of our business. Then labor costs of $35,000 and indirect costs of $20,000. So indirect costs would be any cost other than the direct cost mentioned above, right? So you may think of office supplies, you may think of waste management, you may think of anything consumable wise, right? Chemicals, etc., cleaning supplies. So just to give you a basic sense there, and we've come up with these numbers based on ratios that we've seen through businesses we work with, right? So let's take this hypothetical example. From there, let's look at a 20% reduction in indirect costs. So if indirect costs were to be lowered by 20%, that would be about a $4,000 savings. Notice a 20% reduction in indirect costs. Notice how that directly flows to net profit. There's no additional expenses that come out of that reduction in indirect costs. So net profit increases by $4,000 as a result of a 20% reduction in indirect costs, which also corresponds to a 40% increase in net profit. So let's think hypothetically. In order to increase profit by 40%, typically using the beginning scenario prior to expense reduction, that would involve approximately a 40% increase in total revenue in order to achieve the same net profit outcome without expense reduction, right? So if you think about your business and you think about it hypothetically and you think, okay, how realistic would it be to grow revenues by 40% in a coming year? Now, depending where we are in the life cycle of our business, right? If we're in our first year or second year in the startup phase, that may be possible. But for businesses as they mature, that becomes nearly impossible to achieve. So that's why it's so important to keep a focus on expense reduction, to embed it in our culture, and to make sure that we're practicing that within our business. Okay, so short-term cash flow solution. So now that we understand how important cost reduction is, let's look at some solutions here. And first, let's focus on short-term. So 3-prong approach. The first prong would be generating cash coming in. So in our business, what does that look like? How can we go about doing that? So a first item would be apply for grants and loans. Many of us have looked into this option or explored this option. The employee retention tax credit is obviously still something that's important and that's out there that we should be taking advantage of if we haven't already. Something to keep in mind with the ERTC is that the original deadline was March of 2023. That has been extended. And in some cases, there's been folks that were denied the ERTC initially, that regulations and rules have changed for applications of the ERTC and are now eligible. right? So if you haven't looked into that for your business, that's a good thing to look into, especially if you were operating if your business was operating during the pandemic, from the start of the pandemic, right? That's a relevant area to explore. Another area to look for generating cash coming in is in accounts receivable, right? If we have money in accounts receivable, that's money that's ours that hasn't yet to be captured. We have to go out and make sure that we're bringing that money in, right? So we can put it to work within our business. So prioritizing overdue payments, negotiating payment plans if necessary. You know, in a situation where we have accounts receivable that we feel we may not be able to collect, getting some or a portion of that payment versus none of that payment is always a good option for our business. Another thing we can look at to be more proactive is, do we have early payment discounts that we can put on our invoices that we can offer to clients to incentivize them to quick pay? The quicker they pay, the faster that's in our accounts, the more readily we have to put that capital to work within our business. And this is more of a last case scenario, but if you don't have the resources within your business to go out and capture the accounts receivable that are outstanding within your business, an option is to have a finance company come in and help you with that process. Sure, they'll capture a portion of that revenue, but getting some of that revenue is better than getting none of that revenue. Right? Another thing to consider when we're looking at short-term cash flow generation is, how do we pivot to generate income? Obviously, this was really important during the pandemic. So let's say for manufacturers, right? I'm sure we all saw this on the news or read about this in various different channels about manufacturers pivoting. They switched away from their core business and they went to PPE during the height of the pandemic. So maybe we're not all manufacturers. Maybe that's not exactly the core of our business, but the thought process of making sure that we're pivoting our business to what's in demand to generate cash is always relevant, right? Something as simple as a restaurant selling gift certificates. Typically a $50 cost for a gift certificate may drive $100 in value for the customer, right? There's still a margin there where you're profitable on that. And that's a way to get some advanced deposits in for the restaurant, right? That's another way of generating cash. Auto dealers. If an auto dealer's having a down period in revenue, could we review records? Could we call customers that have open recalls? Just getting someone in the door may be an opportunity to find other areas within their vehicle that need to be repaired and drive some revenue, right? So that thought process, again, it's more the thought process here, not specific industries. The thought process of generating revenue, how does that apply to your business? A loss leader. I always think this is a great thing to think about. What is the loss leader for your business? So when I say the loss leader, what item that you could do at a loss or no cost in your business to generate higher profit margin, right? So I'll give you an example. So in my business, a good portion of the work we do at no cost, right? We will gather information from our clients, their financial statements. We'll produce an opportunity assessment for them. Sometimes 10, 11, 12, 13 pages worth of analysis, detailed analysis, showing them their purchasing data in a way they've never seen, the opportunities for savings. All this is done complimentary for our clients with no commitment to us to work with us. But that's something that we're willing to do in order to generate the possibility of driving revenues for our business, right? So what is that loss leader for you? Is it maybe... So let's take a gold store, right? There's someone that I know that operates a gold business. He does watch repairs for $5. He'll change batteries, right? Now he doesn't make any money off that, but what does that do? That gets people in the door, that gets people looking around at his jewelry selection, that gets people asking about the spot price of gold or silver. And that is a loss leader for him that he leads to generate higher profit margin businesses and services, right? So it's a good thing to think about. All right, another aspect of the three-prong approach for short-term cash flow is slowing down cash going out. So review accounts payable. Are you taking advantage of payment terms? When an invoice comes in, are you paying it as soon as it comes in? Or is there a 30, 60, or 90-day window there where you may be able to float that balance and pay it before it's due or before interest charges accrue, right? This could be important if cash is an issue within your business, right? Now, if you're extremely profitable and you have a ton of cash flow happening and you're not worried about cash flow, not a concern, right? But in a situation where you are worried about cash flow, these are things that you can do to maximize your short-term cash flow, right? Prioritizing, negotiating payment plans or extensions of payment terms, P cards, right? Which is purchasing cards or lines of credit. Consider paying invoices with these. Now, obviously, the key here is you want to make sure that you're able to pay these off, right? Just like a credit card for your own personal use in your household, right? If you're putting anything on a credit card, it's nice to take advantage of that float that the credit card provides or the benefits that credit card provides as far as rewards. But the key is always making sure that you're paying it off prior to the due date. You always want to avoid interest charges. In more serious of a situation, requesting deferrals or forbearance if needed, loans, mortgages, rent, sales and property taxes, payroll taxes. The good thing here to keep in mind is that this is an option, right? Now, maybe this is in more severe cases, but keeping this knowledge in mind that if it was a worst case scenario, where can I go to free up short-term cash flow? These are options. Expenses, right? We've talked about cash flow slowing down through accounts payable, accounts receivable. Looking at expenses is another thing we can do in the short term. Insurance is typically one of our largest expenses as a small business. Some factors that influence our premium is sales and payroll. If these numbers have changed since we got our last quote for insurance or our last insurance review, then there may be some changes to our premium. Keep that in mind. Is there a way to speed up audit terms? If we have an annual review, switching to a quarterly review may provide more updated information and more updated premiums based on our business volume. In our business, we have a variety of different contracts in most cases, or in some cases. Do we understand our contracts? If we have a uniform contract, let's say we're a service-based business and we have uniforms, is it possible to lower our minimum order size, right? So many businesses have waste management. Do we understand what our pickup frequency is? If we have 2 8-yard dumpsters, maybe it's possible to combine that and do 1 16-yard dumpster and pick it up instead of 5 days a week, maybe 1 or 2 days a week, right? In some cases, that can offer dramatic savings. Operating supplies. We're all comfortable with certain brand names, but is there other substitutes that might be at a drastically lower price point with the same quality? 9 times out of 10, there are. Reviewing other expenses, discretionary expensing. What's our process for reviewing discretionary expenses within our business? Do we know what we're spending on discretionary expenses? That's important. Mortgages, obviously at a time like now when interest rates are elevated, refinancing is likely not a viable option, but that changes, right? It changes over time. So it's something to keep an eye on as rates do lower, and we may be locked in at higher mortgage rates, right? Is it viable to refinance in the future? Leases. I think a lot of folks think that if they're under a lease that they're locked in and there's no options. And what we see is there are options, right? A lot of leases were negotiated under different times, pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, right? Reach out to the landlord, have a conversation, see what opportunities exist. Hey, I know I have 3 years left on my lease, but in exchange for extending my lease for 5 additional years, what would you be willing to do as far as lowering my premium? Or maybe there's a change in utility rate, or maybe there's a tax rate change that can happen, right? There's more things that are flexible and negotiable, than we may think. Now, if we have, missed a slide there. If we have staff on site, right? Let's think creatively about how to best utilize man hours, right? One thing that I always like to suggest is hybrid roles. Is your business lend well to maybe a hybrid role for perhaps there's 2 positions that did separate tasks that can be combined into one role that does both tasks, right? And maybe there's an opportunity to do that based on the responsibilities of those positions. So it's just about thinking creatively and intelligently when we look at all of our different cost centers within our business. Okay, so we've talked about short-term costs. Let's transition to talking about long-term costs. And we'll go through our 10-step method to consistently lower expenses, but not just lower them in the short term. The key is to keep them down. So with that said, let's get started. as with anything, I'm sure you've all attended various webinars or been to various trainings in different areas, whether it's marketing, whether it's budgeting, whether it's expense reduction. The key is always what? Number one is always to have a plan and have a strategy. When we have a plan, when we have a strategy, what that frees us up to do is execute against that plan, right? What we don't want to do on a day in and day out basis is have to come in and develop a plan and strategy, right? That takes us away from executing against the plan. So we want to have a plan and strategy in place for expense reduction. That's number one, and that's key. Analyze. So many of us don't have the time, maybe don't have the resources, perhaps don't have the expertise to do this, but it's important that we make an effort to try to analyze our purchasing history, right? If we look at where we're spending money within our business, do we know, right? Do we have multiple suppliers that maybe are providing the same good, right? In that case, what we're doing is we're diminishing our purchasing power with one of those suppliers or all of those suppliers, right? Instead of giving a portion of the spend for the same item to multiple different vendors, if we're able to come to one vendor with the entire spend, typically, we're able to get a better outcome, right? But we have to understand that, we have to know that. So we have to have a method of analyzing our purchasing history. Let's move on to the next one. All right, qualitative needs. So you heard me say at the beginning that a key to expense reduction is not just price. Price is only a component of expense reduction. The other aspect of it is qualitative needs. So what does qualitative needs mean? Quality, right? Do we understand what the qualitative needs of each supplier are? So, from a service standpoint, what does good service look like within this supplier-based category? From a quality standpoint, right? If we're talking about something like food, what does that look like within our business? What is the standard we need to maintain, right? Because once we have a plan, the next thing we have to do is truly understand before we go to market, what good would look like for us outside of just price when we're looking at suppliers within a certain category. Understanding buying assumptions. This is important as well. Many of the assumptions that we had maybe when we started a supplier relationship, whether it's waste, whether it's cleaning supplies, whether it's merchant processing, they may not be the same as they were when we started that relationship, sometimes years ago. So it's good to reevaluate that and understand. Suppliers and their industries. So this is probably one of the more difficult parts of the 10-step process. So if we're going through this expense process and we're looking at these 10 steps and we're doing this within our business, number 5, I think, is really critical. And this is where we have to go out and we have to really attempt to understand the suppliers and their industry as well as we understand our own business. Typically, the only way to get the best outcome when it comes to expense reduction with a supplier is to truly know their business and to truly know their industry. Once you're able to do that, you're able to speak in their terms. You're able to have a level of benchmark knowledge that's going to help you to get the best outcome. So what are some of the areas that we want to understand when we're looking at the suppliers and their industries? So we want to understand market trends. We want to understand what pressures they're under in their business. If they have any cycles or any seasonality, to their business. New developments, alternatives that are happening. Like I said, what terminology do they use? What jargon do they use? Sometimes there's 3-letter acronyms. Just understanding and being able to speak like somebody from that industry, a lot of times gives you a level of cachet and gravitas when dealing with the supplier rep that's going to allow you to get the best outcome. Business practices, unique ways to contract. What are their cost and price drivers, right? What does their business model look like? How do they make money in their supplier industry? What are some benchmarks for similar companies that offer the same service with similar spends in similar geographies, right? That will give you a good understanding when you're reaching out to other suppliers. And and notice this is capitalized in the largest letters, what is their true differentiator? What makes them different? What makes them unique when you're looking at different apple-to-apple suppliers within their industry? All important things to understand and know. Okay, then the next step is we reevaluate, right? So now that we've looked at the first 5 steps, we have a new lens on our supplier relationships. Let's reevaluate our current supplier relationships with these insights. So what does that mean? We're going to go to market. We're going to take this information that we've acquired and we're going to write an RFP, right? So it's a request for proposal. And the reason that we're doing that is because we want to go out to market to look at other suppliers or even at our existing suppliers. We can go to our existing supplier with an RFP. But the key of the RFP is that we want to provide the same information to every single supplier we're looking at in that specific category. That's the purpose of the RFP, right? So we're comparing apples to apples when we're getting bids and proposals back from our suppliers. Negotiate. So after we get our RFPs, we went out to market. We're getting responses back. Now, the responses we get back, that doesn't have to be the end of, of our interaction with these potential suppliers. There's always the opportunity to negotiate, but we want to make sure that we do so effectively. We want to use all the information that we acquired when we went out to market, when we researched the industry, when we learned that supplier's industry like our own, right? We want to separate the relationship, and many times our suppliers and vendors that we work with, we have relationships with them. They stop by every Christmas time, they drop off cookies. We've had the same supplier for 20, 30 years. We trust them. But we have to make sure that we're separating any personal relationships we have from the actual facts and RFP responses that we're getting back. That's really critical. We want to make sure that we're using benchmarks that we've uncovered, right, throughout the RFP process. We're seeing that, let's go back to waste. We're seeing that a waste cost per cubic yard, we're seeing is $29 per cubic yard, right? That's what we're seeing on average across all the RFPs we've seen. We can compare that against each individual bid and see which is in line with industry average for our geography, right? And then we want to think about helping the supplier to save money, right? What are some things that we can do that may reduce the cost on the end of the supplier that we want to work with that will consequently be able to reduce the cost on our end to have them pass along savings, right? Is it order size? Can we increase order size? And then reduce order frequency, right? And that can happen in a variety of different areas. That can apply to cleaning supplies, that can apply to food, that can apply to office supplies. Is there a way to shorten the geography of where shipments are coming from based on using a different satellite location, right? There's a variety of different ways we can look at saving our supplier money. So consequently, we can save money, but just thinking with that mindset will help us, right? And obviously knowing all of our contractual options is always important. Next, we have all the information we've negotiated. Now we have to do something with it. That's the next key step. We have to decide. We have to be decisive. We have to implement, and then we have to start to monitor, right? Because what we have to think of is once we've seen where the savings exist, every day that we delay the process, we're foregoing experience those savings. We're foregoing passing those savings on to our business, right? So that's why we want to make sure that we move, right? Many times as well, when we're receiving proposals and RFPs back from suppliers, there's a time frame in order to implement or accept that proposal. Could be 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, but we want to make sure we don't miss out on that window, because then whatever proposal we receive could be invalid, right? So that's important. And then once we get to the monitoring stage, right, this is where so many businesses fall short. When they receive an invoice each month, who has time to take out the contract and compare it with the contract and make sure the rate's correct? Or if there's an office supply invoice from Staples and there's 3 pages of office supply items, is everyone going to go through each of those 3 pages and make sure they match up with the agreed upon price and make sure there's no fuel charges or travel fees inserted that were not agreed upon in their contract? No. What happens most of the time? Comes across our desk, we look at it. If something doesn't look askew, we stamp approved. We either send it to the bookkeeper or accounts payable and we pay it, right? With this process or with this lack of oversight, there's a lot of leakage within our business. we have to make sure we're taking the time and we have a process to monitor our invoices and our suppliers, right? To make sure that they're adhering to what we've agreed upon, right? Then changing the culture. It's not a dirty word, expense reduction, right? It's part of a healthy culture. Is this a mindset that we're instilling within our teams, not just our leadership teams, within our line level employees, if we have them? Is no cross sacred, right? Is that the mindset that we have? How are we empowering our team to spend money like it's their own? Right? Do they understand the impact of savings in the company? Right now, what maybe 1 million or 5 or 10 million is a bit extreme, but maybe it's a few $100s, maybe it's a few $1,000s, right? How does that impact our business? Right? It's substantial, and it all adds up if we're all focused on the same thing. Are cost saving suggestions encouraged and pursued, or is that an item that would get scoffed at or get brushed under the table? Or if someone brings that up to us, do we make sure we follow back up and let them know that we considered it and here's the outcome, right? Once we do that, other folks are more likely to bring up those kind of ideas. And are we incentivizing, right? If it's important to us, expense reduction and cost reduction, is there a reward system or is there an incentive system within our business to make sure that we're rewarding those that are doing these type of behaviors? So high level view, back to the 10 steps. First is develop a plan and strategy. Second is to analyze and validate your purchasing history. Understand quality, right? Understand your assumptions and processes. Has anything changed over the years or over the months since we originally agreed with the supplier? Understanding that supplier's industry like your own. Reevaluating the supplier relationships and going out to market through an RFP process or a tender process. Negotiating the results. Once we get those results back, acting on them quickly, implementing them, and then a really important part is monitoring them, right? To make sure that the expense reduction outcome in reality is the same as what we think it would be when we started this process. And then really just making sure that we're embedding an expense control mindset into our company culture. Okay, so those are our 10 steps. We'll move on to analyzing spend. All right, so what suppliers don't want you to know. So in our experience, these are areas that most businesses that we come across may not assume to be true, that a lot of suppliers probably know, right? And perhaps use to their advantage. So suppliers don't always give the same pricing to similar clients and customers. I think we as end users and businesses, we think that's the case. It tends not to be the case. Suppliers tend to offer the pricing that they can get away with, right? If they can charge client X more than client B, they may have the same profile. They'll tend to charge client X more than client B. It's just the reality, right? You think a lot of times we think supplier loyalty. Hey, if I've been with this supplier for 10, 20, 30 years, that can, that will give me the best outcome. But what we see is that translates to complacency, allows margins to increase. A lot of times there's agreements on auto renew that renew at a certain increase every year. And if you do that each year over 10, 20, 30 years, you begin to be way off pace from the market, right? I think many of us look at strong arming suppliers or beating up suppliers. We think that will give us the best outcome when it comes to pricing. And a lot of times what we see is that leads to the opposite result. Suppliers, especially in some situations where demand is high, they don't want to work with someone that's going to strong arm them or beat them up, right? They want to work with someone that's truly a partner for their business, right? So that can have an adverse effect. Technology improvements may lower suppliers' costs, but as I said when I started this presentation, just because the suppliers' costs are decreasing on their end, they're not always passing those along to the customers. You need to understand their business to be able to point that out and make sure those savings are passed along to you as the business. Contracts can help you get a lower price, but they can also lock you in during a down economy, right? Renewal clauses, as I mentioned before, should always be carefully reviewed, and I think in many cases should be removed from agreements, right? Because unless you're able to effectively manage that auto renew clause, ask to have it removed, right? I think that's something good to be aware of. Group purchasing organizations, right? So what a group purchasing organization is, it's an organization, it's a conglomerate that usually has larger purchasing power and is able to offer, I think, typically higher discounts. But in our experience, that's not always the case. So group purchasing organizations or national price agreements do not always 100% of the time translate to the best pricing or the best option for you. So it's important to be conscious of that and aware of that. Every invoice should be reviewed for accuracy, pricing fluctuations, and understanding of ancillary fees. That's just across the board. All right, so what challenges do we have as owners of businesses, operators of businesses? You know, we have multiple suppliers, multiple order points, and many times we typically don't have benchmarking data, right? So when we say, oh, I think I have a good price, or I think I have a good situation with X supplier, well, what does good look like? And when we ask that question, then we typically aren't able to get a great response, right? Because we don't have that benchmarking data as a business operator. You know, we have staff and management, they have limited time, right? Even if expense management's a priority for us, you know, there's the fires of the day, there's delivering the service that we provide or delivering our core business, which comes first. So we may have limited time to do expense reduction. And we also have sometimes a little bit of a knowledge gap. We have employees maybe with limited buying experience, and they're left making buying decisions, right? Maybe we have a hierarchical structure in place where we have operations managers, supervisors, or so forth that are left, you know, making these kind of decisions. Right. So those are some of the challenges that we have as a business that, you know, may make expense management a bit challenging. All right. So where does this leave us? So we have to plan. We have to analyze our current spend, understand current contracts, understand the market, decide if RFP or negotiate. So I didn't touch on this earlier, but this is important. So in a situation where we know we do not want to go to market or we don't want to change supplier, it's possible just to have a negotiation with the current incumbent supplier. So we have to make that decision. Do we go to market and do a tender or an RFP, or do we just negotiate with the current supplier? So that's relevant and something to note. There's two ways to go about it. And we have to define and weight what those requirements might look like. So let's say we're going to RFP. Executing the RFP, we have it clear and understandable is always key. We have all the specifications of what we're looking to purchase or order. We have the forecasted volumes. What that looks like on an average annual basis over a 12-month period is typically the time frame we look at. What questions do we want to ask supplier? Is it average order size? Is it order timing? Is it percent of on-time deliveries? What are the questions that we want to compare for all the suppliers that we're reviewing? Price list. We want to look at a price list, right? And see like for like what that looks like. Is alternates allowed, right? If there's an alternate at a lower price point or if one item's not available, do we allow alternates? All things to think about when we're writing up our request for proposal. Collect info for non-price factors. What else is important to us, right? That we want to know. And then look at the total cost, right? Obviously, we're going to look at the cost for the individual items that we're doing an RFP for, but what are the costs of switching vendors? What are delivery charges? I mentioned fuel charges before, right? There's various charges that may be ancillary that we have to make sure we account for. Are there any volume discounts, any rebates that we want to factor into our decision-making process? And always treat suppliers fairly. So those are some tips for executing an RFP. And then analyze. Evaluate alternatives. Score your responses, right? So it's an objective process where you're truly looking at facts and apples to apples and removing emotion from it. Compare pricing, negotiate as needed, determine best value option. Do you award multiple suppliers? In some case, that could make sense, right? Perhaps you have a non-exclusive vendor agreement and you want to do 80% through X vendor. Anything 80% or more gives you the best pricing. And perhaps you give 20% to a second supplier just to have a backup, right? That could, some cases, be the way to go. And then, as we mentioned before, always important to decide and implement quickly. All right, so the expense management continuum. what does it look like? So ad hoc would be the worst scenario. You have no understanding of spend, no competitive bidding taking place. It's that organization I mentioned that gets an invoice, they stamp it, they sign it, they send it to bookkeeper, no review, and it's just getting paid whenever it comes across whoever's desk. Better would be there's some management support expenses. There's some market knowledge of what's happening with other suppliers that offer similar service as their current vendors. They know basic contract details, the key details of their major suppliers, right? That would be better than the ad hoc. Great would be there's a competitive bidding process in place, right? When agreements are expiring, they're going out to market and they're ensuring that the incumbent supplier is the best option when those agreements are up. They're spot checking invoices for accuracy. Maybe it's not every time if an invoice comes monthly or weekly, but maybe it's every 2 weeks or every other month, right? And they're making sure that nothing's changed and that there is some level of accountability to the accuracy of invoices. They understand basic non-core spend. They understand what's happening within their suppliers. And then excellent, the best case scenario would be, all expenses are managed. Analyzing the spend regularly, truly understanding, what spend is happening with all our suppliers on a categorized basis. You're incorporating non-price factors into your RFP. So you're not just looking at price, you're looking at some qualitative information like we mentioned before, right? And making sure that's included in any RFPs when we are going to a competitive bidding process on a regular basis at the expiration of our agreements. We're creating competitive tension. So we said it's important to treat our suppliers with respect, but it's okay to create competitive tension. It's okay to know that for the supplier to know that you are going to shop them around. You're going to look at other options. You're going to make sure that they stay competitive for you. That is typically a positive outcome. But it shouldn't come at the expense of cultivating the supplier relationship. That's important to do as well, right? Communication with your suppliers, right? It's a partnership. Monitoring every invoice, as we said, and track and measure savings, right? That's important as well. All right. So I think that brings us to the end of today's presentation. I did want to mention here, there are some white papers available on our website that I thought may be relevant and also tie into some of the topics discussed today. So you'll see those listed there: creating a culture of cost optimization, becoming best in class. Those are all complimentary through the expense reduction analyst website. If anyone would like to go on and download those, you're welcome to do so. But thank you for the opportunity to review. And I believe we have some Q&A here.
Yes, we do. And thank you so much. A lot of information to digest, I will say that. Here's the first question. How huge are the discounts on factoring receivables?
Yeah, so I'll answer that question a little bit generically, because it is so dependent on the individual business. It's so dependent on the suppliers that are currently being used. It's dependent on how long that agreement's in place. There's so many variety of factors that are going to lead to what the savings will look like. But I will tell you this: we've been doing this for 30 years. We've looked at 30,000 projects. On average, there's about 20% savings in supplier-based expenses, right? So if you look at any of those indirect cost categories in your business, if you take 20% of what that spend is, there's typically that amount on the table. It's just you have to go out there and uncover it.
When you're looking at factoring, though, isn't factoring sort of a financial tool, but it costs you money to do it because they give you your money right up front, but then they have to go fight. Am I looking at that incorrectly, or?
No, you're looking at that correctly. Yeah, no, I think that's valid and accurate, Ed. But yeah, so in our process, it's really about there's about a 2-year period, right? So once we've gone out and we found these savings, there's anywhere from 20 to 30%. It's about monitoring closely over the next 24 months to deliver that savings on a monthly and quarterly basis. That's kind of how we go about it here on our end.
I just wanted to ask one other question about the factoring, because factorings, usually you do that when you're short of cash and you need the cash quickly. And so in a sense, you forego some of the profit in order to get the cash in. Is that pretty much the way you're looking at it?
Yeah, we don't really get into that world, the
Mhm.
factoring side of things. So that may be something that you're more familiar than I am with, Ed.
Uh,
But yeah, typically we're looking at it from a more of a long-term perspective when it comes to cost savings.
Right. Okay. Do you have a template or guidance to evaluate total cost of ownership versus purchase cost?
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah, I think that would be a category specific question as well. And I would think that would be a part of our data analysis when we're looking at, and this sounds like it's more of like equipment and leasing
mhm.
question. So yes, I would suggest whoever that is, I will put my email in the chat. If you'd like to reach out to me, I'll see if I can get you some form of a template or some resources that can help you there.
Okay, here's something interesting. Please emphasize the need for a detailed comparison of each response against the RFP criteria. Suppliers can be intentionally vague on some requirements, driving up costs.
Mhm.
So I think the question is, how do you really look at both 2 or 3 RFPs that you got back? Are they apples to apples, apples to pears? How do you really compare them so you're sure that at the end of the day, the prices are the same, therefore your costs are at the minimum?
So keep in mind that you're creating the RFP, right?
Right.
As the business. So you're simply presenting your form and your questions and your price sheet, which has your volumes over the last 12 months of whatever the goods that provider offers. So you're providing us to suppliers that you've selected to send it out to, and they're simply filling out your form. So it's going to be apples to apples because they're filling out your form. Now, if you just go out to suppliers and you say, send me a proposal, they're going to send you what they want you to know, right? So the key is you're taking control of the process and you're having them fill out what you want them to share with you. And then you can truly have an apples to apples comparison. If I think that answers the question.
Right. No, I think you're right. This is interesting. Are there common expenses that you have seen first-time business owners incurring that are generally not needed?
I think there's a few areas for new business owners or for startups that I don't want to say they're not needed, right? But I think there's a few areas you have to be very careful and conscious of. And I think marketing is one of them, right? Because I think the challenge in marketing is always ROI. We always want to know what the return on investment on our marketing dollars is. So I think the key, and I'm not a marketing expert, right? But I think the key is, just as we talked about in expense reduction, having a marketing plan in place, have a budget for marketing when you're starting your business, making sure you adhere to your plan and to your budget, and make sure there's a method of truly quantifying what the ROI is on those efforts. I would say that is very important. As far as expense reduction comes into play, I think it's good to embed a culture of expense reduction as a startup. But a lot of times your expenses will not mature until the business matures, and you won't be able to extract that 20% for several years, right? Because you're just getting out of the gate. But another area to be very aware of is insurance, right? Typically that's an expense in every business. So just making sure that you are going out, you're getting multiple bids, both for your general liability, your workers' comp, your health, if you have it. That's a high expense area, a cost center for many businesses, in an area that we see a lot of leakage. So those, I guess, would be my 2 areas of advice.
Right. We do actually a webinar on business insurance just for that reason, because there's so many policies out there and people don't quite know what to do. So we do offer that. I also think another area might be just in physical assets. For example, do you really need the fancy desk and the fancy chairs? And, you can't eat the wallpaper, but should you be putting all that art on the wall? When you're starting out in the
Great point,
business,
Ed. Great
don't you
point.
want to
And if you're buying it in volume, right? Don't go to IKEA, right? Or don't walk into Walmart and buy it, right? find a supplier where you can utilize your purchasing power to get additional discounts, right? Don't buy off the rack pricing if you have some volume. Now, if you need to furnish one office or one desk, right, you're probably going to have to pay list price. But if you have some volume and some purchasing power there, you can likely do better when it comes to fitting out your space, right?
Right. Yeah, because it seems to me like that is an area that people tend to get a little over enthusiastic about until the bill comes.
That's a great point.
Now, here's another one that's interesting. How soon after starting your business, I guess, should one over discount?
How soon after starting your business should one over discount? I think that's very much a marketing question, a sales and marketing question, more than an expense reduction question. But I think that's very specific to your business, right? And what you're trying to accomplish. If you're trying to generate demand through price, then that could be a method to undertake. I think I would need more information to answer that intelligently, unfortunately.
Right. I think one of the things that one should look at in that area is the purchase of inventory itself, right? Which in effect is if you over inventory because you get a little too enthusiastic about your product, then what do you do with it when it doesn't sell? And so I guess over discounting is one way to get rid of it, but probably not a smart thing to do. Have you seen that where people started out, loaded the shelves, and then, holy shit, there's no orders. What do I do?
Sure. Yeah, no, sure. That's certainly we've seen that. Yeah, I think it's a matter of evaluating a few different things, right? It's a matter of truly understanding why that's the case, right? Is what your customer needs are, right? How are you targeting the right area from a marketing and sales standpoint? And just how valuable is short-term cash flow versus obviously there's an opportunity cost to selling everything at a discount, right? So going through and doing that analysis and truly understanding, I would say is important.
An area you didn't touch on, but I think it was implied, was, for example, phone expense, electric and gas expense, utility expense, I guess you could put it that way, things like that. I know that the utility companies are always got sort of programs to help small business, but you look into that also as part of your thing, and it seems to me like that is an area to save some money.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah, no, those are all areas that you can review and save some money. From a utility standpoint, I think the lowest hanging fruit is, some folks just take the PICO rate for gas and for electric and they don't do anything else with that on an annual basis. Low hanging fruit is there's two different websites operated by the state of Pennsylvania where you can go on and look at competitive suppliers to provide electric and gas at a lower rate and lock yourself in for contractual terms. A lot of folks you don't even know you can do that. And candidly, you can do this at home in your personal life as well. So I think that's the lowest hanging fruit, right? And that can be for any level of expense and utilities. As you get into larger spends, that's certainly an area that we'll look at and we can review from multiple standpoints, from a tax standpoint, and we can look at different ways of delivering savings there. Cell phones obviously is low hanging fruit, and just truly making sure that you understand your contract and that you're keeping an eye on those as well, right? Because you'll notice those, similar to your cable bill at home, right? Those will tend to increase pretty dramatically year over year. So it's about going out and shopping and making sure that you're getting revised pricing on those pretty regularly.
So when you're looking at a small business that has a delivery aspect to it, let's say a restaurant or something like that, so the transportation vehicle is something that you have to consider, I would think. And so when you're looking at it, obviously a big fancy truck probably is not the brightest thing to do when you're starting out, perhaps a smaller vehicle. How do you look at all of that? I mean, you go from dealer to dealer. Do you look online and there's a spot where they compare everything? What do you do?
Yeah, I think there's a variety of things you want to look at there when it comes to fleet and fleet management. You want to look at obviously the needs that you would have that you need to accommodate from a size perspective. You want to look at the coverage that you'll need from an insurance standpoint on that vehicle and making sure that you have a competitive offer for that. You want to look at fuel, right? How you're going to go about acquiring fuel in the most efficient way. And obviously this is a lot different if you're looking at 1 or 2 delivery vehicles versus if you're looking at 20, 30, 40 vehicles as far as fleet is concerned. But, I think it's just a matter of really doing an analysis at all the different cost centers involved in providing that delivery service, and then going out and kind of doing a similar process as to what we laid out here today. Going out and essentially doing an RFP and looking at your various options that meet your needs would be my advice.
Right. And it seems as though the government is pushing very heavily for electric vehicles, and especially if you're doing local delivery, it's not a bad idea. Actually, we're going to have a presentation by the Internal Revenue Service coming up shortly, which actually talks about this fleet deal that the government has in terms of rebates, etc., for small business. And so I think that's something that everybody's starting to look at. Okay, so here I have my business. It's kind of rolling along. I've got a brick and mortar business and also a business that I do on the internet. And now I'm trying to figure out, I need help with marketing. I realize it's not your bailiwick, but at the same time, I've got to get out there and find out who I should use to help me to market my product. What do I do? Or what have you seen that people do?
I think you got to start with the help of a professional. I think there's a lot of folks in our area and that specialize in that space. There's also a lot of folks that do fractional VP of sales, fractional CGO, right? Chief growth officers. There's a lot of folks that offer help in that space. I would really advise sitting down with a professional. And I know a lot of us have limited budgets when we're starting out, and that's fine. Right. But is there a way to get somebody's help? Because the first thing you have to have is you have to have a plan. You can't get started without a plan. And I think that happens to so many folks. They start working on strategies. They start working on tactics first, rather than having a plan first. And then from that plan, taking out tactics and strategies and budget. Right. But I think you have to make sure you do it in the right order. And if you don't know how to get started with that, find a professional that's what they do and have them help you to get a plan in place.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was thinking also. But I was just wondering, with all the people that you deal with, how they were approaching this situation. Because our clients are small for the most part. And so they're looking for a way to get some help. Now, SCORE, of course, will help them, but also other professional help. Okay. I see that we're at the end of our questions. And so pretty much our time. So I'm going to turn it back to our chapter chair, Linda, for some closing remarks. And thank you so much, Michael. Linda?
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you. Thank you, Ed. And thank you, Michael. Very informative presentation. Good tips for saving money, which we're all after. And sometimes I think as small business owners, we don't look at the obvious. So thanks for pointing all that out to us. This was great. I'd like to thank all of you who joined us today, and I hope that you'll be back next Tuesday. What's our topic next week?
Actually, it's the 11th because next
week's the 4th of July, right? Sorry.
So we're not, but our topic on the 11th is make your business more accessible. Obviously, an internet presentation. Then on the 18th, we have Retirement Planning 101. The state of Pennsylvania has a really good program, and it's something nobody thinks about till it's their time to retire. And you have to think about it a lot sooner. And then on the 25th, we have profit and loss statements, the 1099 form, and all sorts of things to do with that.
Okay, very good. All right. Well, thank you all again. And remember that you'll be getting a copy of everything, the recording as well as the slides in a little bit as soon as our tech guy can get it all out to you. So I thank you for joining us. We don't want to burden him too much, but He's right on top of it. So
Thank
thank
you.
you, and we'll see you all in 2 weeks.
Okay.